Not guilty 10
Charles
times.
Manson, described today by the star witness
Jury
again.
in the so-called Night Stalker case reached its verdict today.
Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of
The woman
murder.
suspected of shooting Selena is still holding police at
Music
bay.
producer Phil Spector was convicted Monday.
In Los Angeles, a killer the police are calling the Hillside Strangler.
Do you find that Mr. Depp has proven all the elements of defamation? Answer, yes.
Welcome back to LA Legal. I'm Leanna. I'm joined by Nima. And today we have a very special guest, Miss Christina Sarkiss.
Hello.
And the reason she's so special is because she's one of our dear friends. She is married to Human Sayagi, one of our senior litigation attorneys at the firm. But most importantly, she's a public defender and a kick-ass one at that. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to have you.
Me.
Oh, and you're so special. We even kicked Nima Ramani to the other side of the couch. so
I'm sitting in the golden seat.
You really are.
Okay.
You really are. But I think what's really cool about this segment is that we have a former federal prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney. And little old me. So this is going to be all about you guys, and let's take it away. Let's talk about Mr. Larry Nassar. Nassar. How do you pronounce his name?
Nassar.
Larry Gerard Nassar.
Who's getting it in the asser in prison right now.
Yeah. Good for whoever's doing that to him. Was born August 16th in 1963 in North Farmington Hills, Michigan. At the early age of 15, he started working as a student athletic trainer at his high school on the recommendation of his older brother, who was already in the athletic training field. After graduating high school, Larry attended University of Michigan, where he studied kinesiology and worked for the track and field team at the university. So it seems like everything just kind of went downhill from there, right? He graduates, he starts working as a doctor.
Well, let's just start there and really stop there. Okay. So this guy's working as a doctor who didn't go to medical school, right? You know how I feel about that. You know, these types of BS doctors that call themselves doctors that are trying to provide medical treatment that probably aren't qualified to do so. So if you're not an MD, don't call yourself a doctor.
But he makes it all the way up to the U.S. Olympics team. I mean, he is well known. I mean, on paper, this guy has done it all, right? I mean, he's working for he's a doctor for the athletes, for some of the Olympians. He's working at the University of Michigan.
Look, he's a trainer.
He's doing something right.
You know, he could be working at 24-hour fitness. So, you know, and I know that's where you guys met. I'm not trying to put it down. But, you know, I just don't think that we should be calling him Dr. Nassar. That's just
I agree with you.
Well, he's no longer a doctor
He's
now,
no
so
longer
he's just Nassar,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, Nassar the pig. So you know what? Let's just take it from here, right? I mean, so this guy is very well known, right? He's very involved in the community, and before these allegations come out, he's had a 30-year span. I mean, he started a foundation for autistic children. Like, he's trying to be on the board of schools. I mean, this is someone who, on paper, is just very well-rounded. He's working with kids, young women, young athletes. So, what are your thoughts on this when this came out?
Look, he did all the things right? He's like the perfect child that a parent could have at the beginning. Yeah. He goes to school, becomes a doctor, he's involved in doctor. Yeah. He like you said, he started a foundation for autistic children. He's like the perfect person, and that kind of created this storm or this disguise of who he really was and the monster he really was, and that helped him out. And that's how he was able to get away with all the abuse for so many years.
And it's interesting because his personality too is, you know, a lot of his victims, when you watch documentaries or if you watch the impact statements, you know, they really trusted him because he was that guy. He was so nice to them, you know, and these are young girls who are training to become Olympians, right? I mean, they're constantly being yelled at and told that they're not good enough, and they're being pushed. And here's this guy who's like, here's a snack, here's some candy. He's sneaking in things into their bedroom, right? And so, I mean, it's disgusting, but he just, like you said, is very much has all of those qualities of a predator.
Well, it goes to the grooming process, right? That's step one, is the grooming process. I know a lot of these gymnasts, they went to this ranch in Texas, the Carolee Ranch, and the husband-wife duo, they were so strict with these girls, and these girls were so scared of them throughout their training that Larry Nassar actually became their saving grace, and he was able to get away with even more of the abuse at the ranch. But then, like you said, he was giving them snacks, he was giving them treats and things like that. So they really trusted this guy, and that's
well, it's the psychology of abuse, right?
Yeah.
We've seen it so many times in different settings, right? Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeff Epstein, where you might have kind of a good cop, you might have a bad cop, where you're there, you're gaining the trust of these young victims, and over time you start normalizing the really abnormal sexual contact and the abuse. So,
and that's actually what one of the victims said. She said that there was a point where the lines were kind of blurred, right? Because like I said, you're constantly, like, you have people breathing down your neck, right? They're pushing you. You're training like 10 plus hours, physically training for the Olympics. And so it really, when something like this happens, when you go to your doctor, if you will, and, you get abused, you think, well, maybe this is just part of what's supposed to happen. And these are children. We're not talking about adults who maybe may think, okay, something's wrong. These are 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 12-year-olds, right? So,
well, let's talk about what happens when you really go to a doctor. And I understand sometimes the parents were there and this abuse happened with the parents physically present.
That's insane.
Is insane, because you have mothers in the room, and he's become, sorry to cut you off, but he's become so good at what he does that he just does it with parents in the room, and nobody even knows.
Well, yeah, let's describe what he is doing, because some folks may know it's pretty disturbing, right? He has this sort of hip exercise or hip treatment, whatever. And during that time, he basically vaginally penetrates these girls, oftentimes without a glove. So let's talk a little about his really kind of his MO, what he was doing to abuse these young girls.
Right. And like you mentioned, what is supposed to happen when you go to the doctor? There's supposed to be somebody there supervising, right, at all times. So you go to the doctor, a nurse comes, right?
Of course. I mean, you guys are
wearing gloves,
right.
Like when you go to the OBGYN, there's always
there's always if you're a male doctor, I mean, OBGYN is one thing. I don't care if you're a cardiologist. If you're a male doctor, there's a female there, you better have a female nurse in there. That's best practice. If you have a child, you're talking about, just additional levels of precautions that have to be there.
Right.
So this guy's not really a doctor, he's a trainer. He's, performing these kind of exercises or treatment on these young girls, and there's really no one there except him and this young child. So that's a problem just out the gate.
He's actually performed some of these procedures, if you will, in their bedrooms too, while they're staying at the ranch. So it's not even like it always happened in a designated, like, I don't know, doctor's office on this ranch. Sometimes these girls are being treated for back injuries or hip pain or whatever in their bedrooms. I mean, and that kind of, to me, leads me to believe that there was not just a blind eye being turned to this, but almost like an active cover-up, which I really want to talk to you
let's talk about the cover-up. Let's talk
That's
about
basically what it is. It's a cover-up. USA Gymnastics was time and time again been given complaints about Larry Nassar, and they always put it on, swept it under the rug. And I guess there was this unspoken rule where if there was a complaint about him, either the victim's parent, or an eyewitness had to sign off on it before they would ever take action. So eventually, when all these allegations started coming out, they found out that there was over 50 complaints that USA Gymnastics received that was just in a file cabinet somewhere, never reported.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and obviously we know those complaints, date back to the 90s, right? There were complaints made, there were settlements reached. But really, you got to give credit, and we talked about how this all came to light, the really Indianapolis Star, right? And, we've seen it time and time again when we talked about Epstein, right? It was a Florida journalist that kind of broke that. In other cases, whether it's Britney Spears or R. Kelly, where you see the media talking about injustices, and that sort of forces, whether it's a university, it's USA Gymnastics, or even the FBI, to do their job and to do the right thing. So I really want to give credit to the Indianapolis Star for breaking this very important
and
case.
that's how things unraveled.
Right.
But so one of the victims, Maggie Nichols, she actually, she's one of the main sort of the faces to this thing, and she felt very uncomfortable after one of her treatments. And so she told a friend, a fellow gymnast, and their coach overheard this conversation. Okay. So the coach overhears the conversation, tells her mom. Okay. The mom files a complaint. It goes to the higher ups. It gets all the way up to Steve Penny, the CEO, who says, I'm going to notify the FBI. Don't make a peep. Don't make a sound. Don't talk about it. You're going to get in the way of the investigation never happens. And so that's heartbreaking. And that right there tells me that this was an active cover-up time and time and time again, because the FBI was never notified, there's no investigation, and the parents were constantly told, just be quiet, you're getting in the way, we're handling it.
Well, yeah, there was a time where the FBI was actually notified, and they didn't conduct a thorough investigation. That was the subject of the congressional hearing. So, both in terms of the failure to report, the inadequate investigation, and then finally, FBI. I mean, you're talking about former federal prosecutor. I hold FBI in high regard. I worked with them for many years. But they botch this case beyond belief, and that was the subject of those congressional hearings as well.
Well, let me ask you this, Nima. What would be the proper protocol, right? So a complaint like this comes up. What are they supposed to do? What's the first thing that happens?
You interview the victims. You interview the witnesses. And what happened in this case, there were 3 alleged victims. FBI interviews just one of the 3 and doesn't even document it in the 302, which is like basically the FBI record of an interview that they typically prepare. Because usually FBI doesn't record interviews, other law enforcement agencies do, so they have to prepare this documentation. So not only did they not do the interview, they didn't document it when they did one of the 3.
I mean, it's unbelievable. Again, we're talking about young kids here, right? You're robbing them of so much at such a young age.
But it was more than that for them, right? They're thinking, USA Gymnastics is thinking, this is going to be the end of us. Because USA Gymnastics is huge. These girls, every Olympics, they were performing, they were representing our country, they were, training so hard. And so this would have ruined them. So they were going to do everything at all costs to cover this up because they didn't want to bring that attention to them.
Yeah.
Look, and I've dealt with cover-ups. I represented the Catholic Church in the sex abuse cases. So, when there's a lot of money at stake, people sometimes sweep things under the rug. Horrible criminal acts. And, we've really seen it time and time again. Obviously, different case, much larger organizations. You have priests, isolated priests, but multiple isolated priests all over the world. But here you have one man with access to hundreds of young girls who's conducting this really widespread abuse. And it happens for decades because people don't do their job. But let's maybe move forward. When we talked about the Star, finally, there's media attention on the university, right? We're talking about Michigan State, where Nassar worked, really forces their hand because there's this public outcry. Let's talk about that a little bit.
So so now you're right. There's public outcry. There's more and more victims coming forward. There's people who, tell the police department that, hey, he's actually conducting treatments and he's practicing medicine in his own basement as well, right? In his home. And so that's what really gives the police department that opportunity to get a search warrant to search his home. Okay. So talk to us a little bit about search warrants. Both of you are very familiar with that, right? So what is supposed to happen, and then we could talk about what they uncovered when they got there.
So when all these allegations started coming up and they were able to get the search warrant based off of his house, based off of him doing treatments in his basement or whatever inside his house. So I think one of the investigators went and they saw his trash can outside and they go, hey, we're going to do a trash can search. And that's where they uncovered all these devices or SIM cards or whatever it was. And they found all this child pornography and things like that he tried to throw away. So that was how they were able to get all of that to start the federal
This is giving me like Crim Law 101.
It's
trash, reasonable expectation of privacy.
No reasonable expectation. You don't need a search warrant to go through trash.
They had one though,
but they had it. But the child porn for folks that don't know.
37,000 images.
So lots of images. The possession, especially the distribution, that carries mandatory minimum sentences. So those are really serious charges when you're talking about the federal criminal justice system. So setting aside the abuse of these hundreds of young girls, I mean, the possession of all this child pornography, it's really indefensible. What is he going to say? I didn't send it. I didn't receive it. It wasn't my computer.
Right. I mean, this also painted a broader picture for me, right? So this isn't someone who's just kind of, not being able to control some kind of like a weird impulse. Like he has thousands upon thousands of images of little girls. I mean, that is someone who's so sick in the head. Sick. And he's married, he's got kids, you know, it's there's no words.
By the way, I mean, obviously the sexual abuse of these young girls is horrific, but I got to say something about child pornography. Child pornography is incredibly bad because those young victims continue to be re-victimized because these sick fucks, they send it all over the world, and once it's out there, you can really never get it back. So that's why child pornography is incredibly harmful to young victims.
And it's deeper than that too, because a lot of these victims, a lot of these children that are in the images, they're either kidnapped children in sex trafficking. So, they're missing children, and then they end up victims of being in the images of this child pornography. Right. So it's a lot. It's sickening.
It's sickening. So he gets brought down to the police department for an interview. Okay, so I actually have a few of his quotes because I'm not even kidding. When I was watching it, I had to go back and rewind. I was like, no.
I think I know what quote.
I need to jot this down.
Well, if Christina was representing him, he would have invoked for sure.
Absolutely.
But I mean, okay, hear me out. All right, so the question was, do you get aroused during these exams? You knew this one was coming, right? I mean, I don't. And
I'm going like this.
Lawyer. He's there with no lawyer. He's just there, answering questions.
That's how confident he is.
Acting like, oh, there's another allegation. Literally, he was like, another one? What? His reply, I shouldn't be getting an erection during exam. If there was arousal, it's, you know what I mean? It would be sort of, whatever. I don't know. When you're a guy, sometimes you get an erection.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, I have no explanation aside from the fact that he had gotten away with these types of these sham investigations, these BS apologies. He's gotten away with it for years.
But he's he's basically admitting it, right? When you're a guy, you get an erection sometimes when you're treating a 9-year-old for back pain from a gymnastics class.
I think at that point, it's the part of the confession where you want to give them something, but you don't. So you kind of say did someone say that? Well, maybe, I don't know. It could have happened. It's just it's that sort of thing. So that's why it's always important never to speak to anyone without an attorney.
Right. Well, there you go. Lesson 101. Yeah. But, okay, so Nima Rahmani, prosecutor, you get some kind of a statement like this, right? You watch these tapes. What is going on in your mind, right? Because now you're trying to build a case against this guy. You're trying to defend him. So what goes through your mind? And then I want to hear what you would do because you're on the other side of this.
Yeah, so what goes through my mind when it comes to any sex abuse, sex assault case is the more victims you have, it's incredibly sad and tragic and terrible, but it makes the prosecution that much easier. Often these types of abuses, they happen behind closed doors. There's not any recipient eyewitnesses to it. You're relying on the victim's testimony in and of itself, and you never want the defense to successfully cross-examine your victim by saying that it's fabricated because they reported it years later, or this is all about money because you filed a civil suit. There's any number of different ways to defend these cases, but I believe as a prosecutor, if you have many victims, you overwhelm the defense and there is no defense. Yeah, you can say one victim's lying, but if 10, 12, in this case, 100 victims are describing the same exact sexual conduct, there's no way you can defend that case, in my opinion.
So you're less concerned about, the dumb things that this guy has said because now you have all this.
Oh yeah, if you have an admission, that's great, but you really want the victims and you want them to come forward because, the instructions are clear. The testimony of one victim, one witness is enough, but sometimes jurors, they just have a tough time believing one victim. Right. So the examples I like to give recently are like Harvey Weinstein, right? They piled on a lot of victims. Or even Bill Cosby. When Bill Cosby was prosecuted the first time in Pennsylvania, he was prosecuted with one victim, one prior bad acts witness, right? 404 or 1101 victim here in California. And that first jury hung because the jurors they didn't have enough. Then they retry the case, one victim, 5 prior bad acts, 6 total, they convict. Now that conviction, of course, was later overturned for procedural reasons, but whether it's any type of these Maxwell, we're kind of going through all these recent R. Kelly recent sex abuse cases, you see what the prosecution wants to do. They really want to pile on a lot of victims because that guarantees you a conviction.
Yeah, it's easy to when you have a victim on the stand, it's easy to show that they're not credible if it's just one person or 2 people with, little things here and there with each person. But when you get 4, 5, 6 people who are saying the same thing, same fact pattern over and over again, then it becomes really, really difficult for a defense attorney.
Especially when they show that a lot of them didn't even know each other, right?
Yeah.
These are hundreds of girls who are training in this ranch or whatnot, but not all of them were in the same teams, in the same age category. So when a lot of them describe, if not all of them, are describing the same thing, it becomes hard to poke holes in.
I think the earliest complaint was when he was in medical school. Somebody in his someone in his medical school made a complaint against him during that time, as early as that time. So, and no one listened to her.
Sick pervert.
Yeah. But look, and we talked about obviously different cases with Michael Jackson, right? When you have a smaller number of victims, It's a much easier case to defend.
But you also, in that case, we talked about this, shameless plug in our previous episode, but we talked about how, you know, the issue there was these people were not credible, right? We had the mother, you know, and you just have all these.
It's a shakedown, it's money,
right.
you know, they filed civil
here
suits. So.
You have, and it was incredible to watch, and this is all on YouTube for anyone who's interested, but you have 126 young girls come up, and each one of them has a statement, and it's chilling, right?
Very.
And it's 4 days. That's all the court had to listen to, is all these women come by and say the same story over and over again.
Yeah, definitely shameless plug, but you know, if you go back to the Michael Jackson episode of LA Legal, I mean, you saw how the defense did an outstanding job. Maslow, I mean, they just went after these victims, just kind of broke it down, showed the jurors that they're not credible. They got a full acquittal. How are you going to do that here? I mean, how can you possibly defend this case when there's so many victims that come forward? And when it comes to sex abuse, and when we talked about the psychology, it's very hard for these victims to come forward. They've already been, they've suffered this trauma. Then they have to relive it in such a very public way. It's hard to testify. But when you have so many other victims that come forward, that kind of creates a snowball effect. It empowers these victims. They can come forward. They see other people that are similarly situated. So it helps them and gives them a voice as well.
Right. They're not victims anymore. They're survivors. And them being able to stand up there in court and face their molester and say, you know, you did these things to me. This is what you did to me. But look at me now. I'm not going to let you ruin the rest of my life. I'm going to let this one, you know, I'm going to be the strong woman I am, and you're going to rot the rest of your days in prison. And he stole their lives. He stole their innocence. He stole their youth. And if you think about it, like, these girls are training. They're so young. It's like they're scared to tell anyone because they're scared no one's going to believe them. And also, they don't even understand what's happening to them.
Right.
His youngest victim, I think, was 6 years old. It's like, how is a 6-year-old going to go to her mom or dad and say, like, Dr. Nassar did this to me? You know what I mean? How does a 6-year-old explain that? So he took away their youth and their innocence.
And that's the thing, because how do they know that that's wrong, right? You just, again, it's this, you know, you're in a position of power, you're a doctor, right? We're all kind of taught that, like, okay, doctors know what they're doing, and, you know. And so when you're in a situation like that as a child, I agree with you 100%. You wouldn't even know that that's wrong to then go tell mom and dad, right?
Yeah.
So
I know we're getting the look from our producers, because we're probably going to run out of time unless we start moving toward the actual charges in the case.
Jesus.
You know, so he's obviously fired, right? Michigan State, their hand is forced. And then he's first charged stateside, right? So let's talk about that. I mean, there's multiple state cases, the federal case. Let's talk about some of the charges. And obviously, we got a kind of unique judge that we're going to want to talk about. We're going to want to talk about the sentences.
She was a badass.
Judge Aquilina.
She was, I mean, wow. But
let's turn to the legal side of LA Legal right now. So let's go.
Go ahead.
So he was originally charged in, I think it was Eaton County.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Eaton County. And then that's what led to getting the search warrant and all that. Mm-hmm. And they found the child pornography in his trash can, which then led to him being charged with all the federal crimes that he was charged with. And then he also had sexual assault cases out of Ingham County, I believe it was. So he had 3 different, 2 state and 1 federal case that he was fighting there. But after all these came out, he pled pretty quickly, I would say.
Yeah, no, he did. I mean, he pled quickly. I'm guessing because he appealed his sentence, he did not think he was going to get slammed the way he did. Sometimes if you plead, look, you get some time off, you get a discount, you know? So obviously it didn't happen. But I really think, especially the federal case, really kind of indefensible. It's very hard when you have child pornography. It's on your computer. The digital footprint is clear. You don't need victim testimony in that type of case. So
he pleads guilty to child pornography and willfully destroying evidence in exchange for the dismissal of traveling with the intent to commit sexual assault, which is a violation of federal law. So would you say that this was good advice on the part of his attorneys, right? Because now we're dealing with someone who he's indefensible. Is there a defense for him, really?
Well, like Nima said, it's really hard with child pornography cases. Once it's found and it's obviously his, it's in his trash can, he was trying to get rid of it. It's really difficult. But he did, in that case, receive a sentence of 60 years. Yeah. At his age, that's a life sentence, right? Unless he was blessed enough to live a long life. But that's a life sentence for him, so...
Yeah, in federal law, you're going to serve 85% by statute. So, even if he's a model inmate, what is that? Yeah. Not a mathematician, but that's well over 50 years. Right. So,
and he did get a little bit of a discount, like 300 days here and there, but I mean...
He's not even going to get to his state sentence.
Yeah, he's rotting for the rest of his life in prison. So So he pleads, right? He pleads guilty, and at this point, everyone's ready for trial. The jury letters have gone out. He pleads, and so talk to us a little bit about how that agreement came forward, right? Because now before the sentencing, the prosecutors want to put all of the victims, allow them a moment in court, right? And then he comes back and he says, well, I'm not stable enough to listen to this for 4 days, right? And he pens a very long letter to the judge saying that, due to health issues and mental issues, I can't sit here and listen. I mean, that really made me laugh.
Judge Aquilina started reading,
and so she whips out, just like I'm sitting here, highlighted, and I have never seen anything like it. Have you guys? She just tears into this man. She's like, I wouldn't send my dogs to you, sir. Like, I was mortified for him. And what I love that she said was, you did this for 30 years. You can sit here for 4 days and listen to how you've impacted your victims. So how did you feel about that?
About her reading the letter? It was interesting because it was throughout the victim impact statements and things like that, and she's just attacking him. And she's saying things, I've seen judges say things to defendants, really bad things, but she's very eccentric in the way she was doing it, and I think she got a little backlash from it because they said she's doing it for the publicity. She doesn't really care much, but she really went at him, and she took every sentence by sentence and going at him. So it was fun to watch. But
it was fun. It was kind of good TV. But here are my thoughts. One, it doesn't matter because he's serving a federal sentence already. Just so we know, the reason he pled to federal charges, one, it's indefensible. Two, a guy like this, you want to be in federal prison. You don't want to be in state prison where, we made some jokes about, sexual assault. Obviously, we hope no one gets sexually assaulted in a prison, but you're going to be much safer in a federal prison. That's why we saw someone like Derek Chauvin plead to federal charges because you want to be in federal prison, not stateside. So he's already in federal prison. He's not going to do much, I think, if any state prison time. So you got this judge that's kind of showboating. I get it. It may help the victims' families, but now you're creating an unnecessary issue on appeal, right? So now he's a basis to appeal. Really, if you want to kind of hammer him, it's one thing, but some of the colorful language that we're using here on the podcast, we can't do that. If you're a judge, you got to kind of be,
right. And that's what I was going to ask you guys. It was great to watch. Don't get me wrong. I'd never seen anything like it, but I was like, wow, are you being super biased here? You really hate this guy. So
there's a level of professionalism that you have to keep as a judge, court decorum. I know you hate this guy. Everybody hates this guy, but when saying certain things as a judge on a case, you're running the risk of, there being issues in the future.
Yeah, and obviously the appellate court looks at it. They said, well, what difference would it have made? She sentenced him within the range that was appropriate. So we don't need to say these things. Listen, I get it. We all hate Larry Nassar. I would love to talk shit to him too. Don't get me wrong. But I think, if you're the judge, just sentence the guy, let him die in prison without saying, I want you to die in prison. You don't have to say that.
Well, she basically did.
She did say that.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Your death sentence.
Yeah. Right. I think that's what I'm saying. If the cameras weren't there, if it wasn't Larry Nassar, if it was, some Joe Schmo that we don't really know, I don't think she would have been as eccentric. I think the cameras in there really turn her on to, I think she wanted to be that judge. You know what I mean? It was her opportunity. I think there was one story where someone wrote her name on a t-shirt, wore her name on SNL. And then she went to trademark. She trademarked her name right after that. So I think she kind of wanted the attention for herself too, in a way, which it's not right.
She actually did an interview, and that's another thing I hadn't really seen. She did an interview with, I think, the morning show or something, and she was like, people stop me in the grocery store, and how often do people recognize judges, right? The average schmo, do they recognize a judge? No. And so she did become a little bit of a celebrity, I guess, but
she'll probably see me doing mediations like the rest of them. So,
exactly.
Arbitrations, she'll be on the panel.
Okay, well, any final thoughts on this topic?
I just, as a criminal defense attorney, and I want to preface this, look, Larry Nassar's guilty. He pled guilty. He's a convicted child molester. But as a criminal defense attorney and speaking through my experience, everyone who's in a court of law is innocent until proven guilty, and a charging document is not evidence of a crime. But doing this for 8 years, I see two sides of the spectrum. You either see juveniles who are charged with something like this, and it's basically, when I spoke to an expert, they said curiosity killed the cat. It happens a lot more than you think. Doesn't mean this juvenile is a molester or, sexual deviant. It's just hormones raging and things like that. And it happens more than you think sort of issue.
Sometimes those juveniles were abused themselves, right?
Correct. Yeah. And that's another thing. And then what you see is someone like Larry Nassar, someone who's, either highly educated, is very prominent within the community, starts foundations, is like the babysitter for the cousin, is always there picking up the children from school, has absolutely no criminal history, not as much as a traffic ticket. So it's like, oh, how could I have done this? That sort of thing. So he fits the profile. He fits the profile. He did everything that he's supposed to do to convince these people that I can't believe you would accuse me of something like that.
It's very like Ted Bundy.
Like mom, you were in the room. You saw, like, how can you? I think one of the moms said their daughter came to them and she's like, I didn't believe her. The mom said, I didn't believe my daughter when she told me that because I was in the room. And that's tough. That's really, really tough.
That poor daughter. Poor girl. I think kind of the takeaway is obviously, look, you have USA Gymnastics, you have Michigan State University. They dropped the ball. They had to pay hundreds of millions of dollars. And justifiably so. I mean, we haven't even scratched the surface on the civil lawsuits and settlements. But really kind of the takeaway is, this is someone that had access to a lot of kids. Whether you're a teacher, whatever your profession is, if you have that kind of access, there's got to be oversight. You can't be a dude like me. I'm just being real. Like, I'm the guy here. I cannot be in a room with a bunch of young girls unsupervised, and I'm not saying that I'm a deviant or anything, but there has to be oversight. There's got to be always someone there watching, because otherwise you're putting these young children at risk.
You just can't trust anyone, as you and I both have daughters. Like, I cannot imagine a scenario, especially in this day and age where, I'm like, okay, go off to camp and
or even if we have a great relationship, I would not feel comfortable with just your daughter. Like, that's just it's potentially problematic in so many ways. So again, the last thing you want to do is blame the victims or the parents, but we're just trying to kind of take a step back and say, listen, what could have been done differently to prevent this? Obviously, the biggest takeaway is listen to the first victims, do your job, do an investigation. But I mean, we've seen this recently, both at UCLA and USC recently. There were kind of doctors that abused hundreds, maybe thousands of women, and we kind of take a step back and we think, like, how could this possibly happen over a span of so many years?
And it happens. And so one final thought is, I don't know if you guys saw, but one of the dads to one of the victims, when he attacked him in court, did you guys see that? And he was just like, give me 5 minutes. And honestly, when I saw that, I thought,
give me the 5 minutes.
Give me a minute. Give me 1 minute. And I think if you want justice to really be served,
I get it.
I mean,
the most
put the dad in a room.
Yeah. The most insulting I thought was when the victims were giving their statements, the MSU president showed up and all this media attention came to her and she just kept saying, I don't want to answer any of your questions, because they were hammering her. They were saying, like, where were you guys when these girls were making these complaints? She kept saying, you know what, today's not the day. Today's about the victims and the survivors. Today's about the victims and survivors. It's like, then why are you here? Now you care, now that they're here giving their victim impact statements. Now you want to be here and you're saying, you know what, let's talk about this later. I'm just here to support them. It's like, really? Now you're here to support them? That's very insulting, in my opinion.
I agree.
And I agree with Nima. I think, this isn't ever going to end. That I think that's just the reality of the world we live in. But I think that if we all start taking even the slightest complaint a little bit more seriously and doing the due diligence of investigating, whether true or not, at least we can, as a society, as employers, as corporations, whatever, maybe save somebody else from this. From this kind of a nightmare.
Yeah, and again, Christina is a defense attorney. Sexual assault, rape, it certainly can be falsely reported. It happens. But I guarantee you, it is the most underreported crime.
Yes.
By far. So when a victim is brave enough to actually speak up,
they deserve at least an investigation.
Right.
Yeah. So with that said, thank you so much, Christina.
Wasn't this fun? Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me.
Well, maybe we can have you back
another time.
Great. This was really fun. Thanks, Nima. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.